This week, the conservative leader touched a nerve, one that's leading a lot of people to call him a little bit weird and anti-woman. It's a similar phrase that was pinned on JD Vance during the American election, calling him weird. Now, I don't think that this is the best choice in words, the one that Pierre Poilievre has just used. We're going to talk about this today, but it also reflects a horrifying reality, a reality that is reality for many Canadians. Now, meanwhile, it seems like everybody is getting canned this week. We've got two conservative politicians who were said, "We no longer need you," by the Conservative Party of Canada. Two firings there. We had a journalist kicked off of a national news broadcast. Well, because of some internet drama, some people being very extreme on the internet. And also, you probably heard about this, a Liberal member of Parliament who Mark Carney was standing behind amidst some serious allegations, and then all of a sudden he no longer was in the picture. It seems like people are dropping like flies right now. And we're going to talk about all of this today because this is the Russ Matthews Show. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening in. Some interesting stuff to talk about today. I'm excited to get into it. But first, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Listen to this podcast and rate it and review it wherever you listen to your podcasts, Apple Music, Spotify, all of the major podcast platforms. You can find it there. And also, this has a new home on YouTube. You might have been listening to this previously on my main shorter content channel, or that's what it's going to be now. And now we have the Russ Matthews Show on the Russ Matthews Show YouTube channel. So I'd appreciate you following me over there and subscribing as we grow a base of people who are really interested in this long form type of content. We've got to get into stuff, though. Enough preamble, enough babble off the top, Russell. And this is what you're all saying. I hear it. I hear you're one of the many voices in my head that I hear on a regular basis. We got to talk about what's been going on. And this is all relating to what I was just sort of teeing up there at the beginning. But we got to start somewhere different. We've got to start on housing in Canada, because this week we saw some pretty serious announcements from some of the major political parties in Canada leading up to this election, housing announcements that are supposed to make a big change for Canadians. Now, this might not feel like so much of an issue depending on how wealthy you are and how established you are in your life. Maybe you're not thinking about housing all the time, but I know for a large percentage of Canadians, it's hard to stop thinking about it just because of how expensive housing has gotten. Now, I'll talk to you about these plans and what I like in them, what I don't like in them. You can check them out in more detail on the main channel, Russell Matthews on YouTube. But I'm not entirely satisfied, and I think you're going to understand why. So we've got the Liberals and Mark Carney coming out, and they promised 500,000 new homes per year by 2035. Hoping to hit that 500,000 new home per year target by 2025. So a long-term promise. And he's going to do this by creating a government organization called Build Canada Homes, or BCH. Now, we could talk about the policy in a second, but a little bit of a clunky name. You got people, we're trying to talk about this thing, and we're going to say, oh, first you got to go talk to Build Canada Homes. It just doesn't roll off the tongue the way that you might want, like the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. It seems like an entity rather than a verb, Build Canada Homes as an agency. But I digress. This agency, BCH we'll call it, the plan is that they will act, the federal government and this agency will act as a project manager for all of these housing starts, a project manager trying to efficiently develop housing in Canada. Now, on the channel, we talked about, okay, well, your view on this is going to be largely determined by how much faith you have in the government to project manage, like they're saying they're going to do in this, and if the dollars spent by this agency will be efficiently spent with the government as a project manager. You may see that differently than another person, and that's fine. They also say that they're going to put in bulk orders for some of the growing businesses in Canada, ones that are focusing on modular homes and prefabricated homes, with the idea being that, hey, these companies, while they're not efficient yet, builders aren't really using them en masse. But if we, the government, give them these long-term contracts, give them millions of dollars in certainty in contracts for this federal home building program that we're going to start, well, then maybe they'll be able to reach scale, be able to become a little bit more efficient, and become a more viable option in Canada. And on top of that, they say they're going to reduce development fees by paying out municipalities for their losses in cutting development fees in half. That's what they're saying. We're going to cut all development fees across all towns in Canada in half. And we're going to make those municipalities whole for what their development fees are today, even though they're now going to charge developers half of that. So the federal government just making transfers to municipal governments. They also say they want the provinces to pitch in. I don't really know how this is going to work. It seems like it's rewarding governments and cities that already have high development fees to me, but we'll see how it plays out if it were to happen. Now, the Conservatives come in with an entirely different approach. I think we have not yet heard their total pitch on housing. We've got some of their policy ideas from a couple of years ago or a year and a half ago saying Conservatives are going to do a carrot and stick approach, saying, hey, municipalities, not like the Liberals, we're not going to cover your additional development fees. We're going to force you to do whatever you need to do to get the houses built, whether that's lowering development fees or some other stuff to get rid of red tape. We're going to say, if you don't build such and such amount of houses, well, you're going to lose out on such and such amount of federal funding. And if you build more houses than is your target, well, you're going to get additional bonuses. So trying to put it in money terms for these municipalities to say, hey, here's a real incentive for us to get moving on building housing. Like I said, who knows if that would work or not. Also, a big policy is this capital gains deferral. The idea that, okay, Canadian investments, you can sell and not have to pay capital gains tax as long as you roll that investment into another Canadian investment. The idea being, well, maybe this will help velocity of money, maybe more projects will get started, and maybe it will spur on a big economic boom. And we can debate what's best all day long. You're going to have a different view than I am. I'm going to have a different view than you are, or your neighbor is, or your buddy next door. We can talk about it all day. But what's most important to me is not necessarily these policy solutions, but what I'm looking for in a political candidate is their ability to talk about, how did we get here? Why are we in the housing and cost situation that we are in? And how are we going to prevent that from happening again in the future? And it's something that I haven't gotten an entirely satisfactory answer from any of the parties here. Because if you cannot enunciate what has happened in the past and what was the cause of the problems that we're now facing, then even if you try to fix the problem that is happening now by creating a solution for the problem that we've gotten ourselves into, well, where is the certainty that we're not going to then repeat the same mistake and get ourselves into a similar problem where even 500,000 homes built a year, which I think we're all skeptical of, where even that amount would not be sufficient to solve the problems? Because look at it from the perspective of somebody who's trying to buy a home and get their family started in Canada. You got people saving for a down payment. Look, maybe they were doing this between 2018 and 2020, saved a bunch of money. We're getting closer and closer to buying a home. So they were smartly not keeping that money, that down payment money in the stock market. You never know what the market's going to do. Then COVID hits. They're like, thank God we didn't keep our money in the stock market. Everything's down. But then as they start to more seriously consider things, well, all of a sudden house prices are rising dramatically. Your down payment percentage isn't high enough anymore to purchase a house because asset prices, real estate prices, have gone through the roof. So for those people who are trying to get into houses now, trying to get into houses in the next 3-5 years, trying to start a family, well, they're facing some serious problems, and promising 500,000 new homes a year by 2035 doesn't sound all that encouraging, right? Maybe in a decade we'll actually be able to build homes at a scale, but even then, will the prices really even come down? And even if we make these changes that the Conservatives are suggesting, well, these are all things that will flow through the economy over the long term. And if we wait 10 years from now, we've got more houses being built, more money flowing. If we make and repeat the same mistakes, the mistakes that nobody is really talking about, well, then have we really even gotten all that much further? I don't think so, because nobody's really asked these leaders what has caused the housing crisis. I think that they all have different perspectives on this, but you don't hear that as much. You hear, here's how we're going to solve this housing crisis, not here's the way that we're going to make sure that we don't get ourselves into this pickle again, because we are in quite the pickle. I think personally, and you might have a different view than me, and that's just fine, but in all the looking into it I've done, it seems to me that there are three main areas that have caused this crisis. Ones that I'm not certain we have solutions for going forward, which makes me skeptical. The first one being stimulus, specifically financial stimulus in times of disaster. I've done this song and dance a million times. You may have heard it before. But if we look at times of disaster, we look specifically, most recent in memory, we look at the pandemic. Well, how was the economy treated then? Well, there was fears that the economy would stall out because we were keeping everybody at home. So the idea was, let's lower interest rates to the lower bound, the very lowest we possibly can, so that people can borrow money for very cheap, to the point where it would almost make sense. It wouldn't make sense not to borrow some money because you're paying like 1% in interest rates. That was part of the idea. The other part of the idea, let's print hundreds of billions of dollars a month, and let's allow that to flow into the economy so that, well, stock prices will be elevated and will spur on this additional demand. Money is cheap. We can just keep on spending and we'll save the economy that way and hopefully prevent scarring, making sure that people have jobs to go back to when the pandemic's over. And I've said this a million times. That might have been a good idea. That may have been a good idea, and maybe we'd be in a worse position today than we are currently if that wasn't done. Maybe there would be some sort of financial calamity. But we can't ignore the negative side effects that have come because of handling our monetary policy in this way. Those negative effects being, first, we saw asset price inflation. We saw stocks and real estate and crypto and precious metals all balloon in price because of the creation of new money. The creation of new money meant that each individual dollar didn't go as far. And as a result, these things that are measured in dollars, well, they're worth more dollars now because each of those individual dollars is worth less. That was part of the appreciation that we saw in real estate throughout 2021 and 2022. The other side is people try to ignore the two-sidedness of this real estate market. We say our big problem is that we need to build more homes. We need 500,000 more homes a year, and that is our way out of this. But that's addressing one side of the market. Of course, you've got like sellers or supply, but you've also got buyers or demand. And we turn away from talking about the demand issues because maybe it feels icky and maybe it feels like people are gonna get mad at you if you talk about the way that population change in Canada and over the past few years, heavily fueled by immigration, and specifically the temporary foreign workers as well as international students. What impact did that have on the real estate market? Well, certainly when you add a lot more demand into a market and we don't have the capacity to build to that demand, well, you understand supply and demand. More demand, same supply, higher prices. This is something that we also need to talk about. And we'll talk about it in more depth because I know that the politicians who are campaigning right now have both said, well, we recognize that immigration has been an issue. We're going to cap it over the next 3 years and then who knows, we'll see what's going to happen. But there's a nuanced discussion around immigration that doesn't just relate to housing, but it relates to, well, how are we going to make this economy work going forward? We're addicted to growth and growth and growth and growth and debt. And if we no longer have a birth rate that is at replacement or above, which we're well below at 1.26 people per woman, per couple, you only get 1.25 people out of that for the next generation. So if we don't welcome immigration, well, then what's going to happen as our population shrinks, or what policies can we look at to make sure our birth rate increases so that we can continue in this sort of perpetual growth Ponzi if we want to just keep on kicking the can down the road? Or what are the ways that we're going to reform our economy so that we don't need forever growth? Or maybe you just think we'll continue with immigration forever and we're just going to increase it. And somewhere in the world, there's always going to be a wellspring of people that will come here to Canada. I'm skeptical of that solution as well. But those are two things that have caused the housing crisis: stimulus and immigration. The third, I think, is vastly not talked about. And this all ties into what we're going to talk about with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's blunder, I'd say, in the way that he's talking, but blunder that reflects a reality for a lot of Canadians. The third one here being the way the government has signaled safety in real estate as an asset class. We hear all this talk about investors being part of the problem for the real estate market. Investors buy up all of this real estate, and now single families can't access the real estate or the homes that they would otherwise buy because prices are too high because the investors have bought it all up. Yeah, that's true. That's true. There are a lot of people who own a lot of homes in Canada, multiple homes, multifamily homes, and do it as an investment with rental properties, whatnot. Of course, we know that happens in Canada at a high level. The numbers work a little bit less well right now. A difficult game to get into these days, but certainly over the past 10 years, real estate has been the way to get rich in Canada. And that wasn't always the case. That didn't have to be that way. And I think part of the reason that we've seen so many investors heavily flock into the real estate market is because of what the government has signaled about real estate in Canada. Whenever there is an issue in the economy, it is the real estate market that the policies that come out are supporting. Whenever there's some calamity, whenever there's a worry that people are going to default on their mortgages or maybe house prices will go down, you've got major new policies coming in that will impact that. And it makes you start to question, well, okay, we made it through the 2008 financial crisis decently. We did. We didn't see our house prices come down, and we didn't see the dramatic, vast layoffs that we could have seen. Sure, I'll buy that. But do we treat the way that the 2008 financial crisis was handled as a success? I'm not so sure. I saw this on Twitter. Oh, if you're watching on video, you can see my face isn't entirely cut off of this clip. There we go. Fixed it up. And also, if you're watching on video, you'll check my prescription shades so I can see over to my computer screen. I'm at my desk over here. But I'm looking at a chart for those of you who aren't on video. I'm looking at a chart and it shows the household debt and how that ramped up prior to the 90s and to the 2008, 2009 recessions. And we see a number of different economies where real estate prices ballooned into the late 2000s. The first sort of 10 years of the 2000s here before the financial crisis. And we see a number of different economies that after that financial crisis, well, real estate prices went down. They deleveraged. There was less household debt tied up in mortgages. But we see an outlier also in this chart, and that is that while other economies were deleveraging, while other economies had house prices going down, well, in Canada, the slow march to increased forever debt, we kept on marching step by step. And I think that's important to think about when we look at one of the biggest claims from Mark Carney in the Liberals right now is that, well, he's the guy to get us through tough financial times. Look how well we fared throughout the financial crisis. But is that track record really a success? Our real estate prices didn't go down and people didn't lose their homes, and especially the people who were in too much debt, who were out over their skis. But what impact has that now had on family formation? What impact has that had on Canadians socially and how tied they feel to the country, that they can't set up a home base and feel like house prices to incomes, that ratio has gotten entirely off to the point where it doesn't even feel feasible for most people to get into real estate unless they were already in it prior to the pandemic. I think that these are the questions that we've got to ask. And I think it leads to this idea that, and you can see it in the polls right now, that there is a difference in opinion of the leaders based on age, largely. Of course, this isn't a lump in everybody into one category. There are young people who are supporting Carney, and there are old people who are supporting Polyv. It's not a certain thing, but when you look at the polls, certainly the ones that are out right now, you see that the base support for the Conservatives is young people, 35 and under, with the base for the Liberals right now being 55 plus. And it makes you question, okay, well, could that partially be the way that they see the current world order helping them or hurting them? If you've owned assets and you've owned real estate, you've seen the best economic times that I think any lifetime could have had. The perfect timing. You buy your house, you have it continually go up and up and up and up and up for 30 plus years. And you see other economies where the house prices went down. And you think, thank God we got through this unscathed. But it's the knock-on effects. It's the what happens because we didn't go through that deleveraging that isn't thought about. Just something that I had to bring up. Something that I had to bring up because I think that might be part of the reason why we see such a difference here in favorability for a possible new prime minister, well, new or continued prime minister. But this all lumps into this problematic, or at least in some people's eyes, problematic statement made by Pierre Poilievre this week, one that got a lot of people online very enraged, and we got to talk about that right now. This clip may not sound entirely extreme to you. It didn't to me at first listen. It did feel like an unforced error that people will use against Pierre Poilievre. An unforced error that he didn't have to say. One that language that was used prior, but there wasn't much outrage of. Now, of course, there's a little bit more scrutiny on the campaign as we're in this campaign period, this election period. It's language that, taken out of context, will make a lot of people feel weird. Maybe even taken in context. But at the same time, it demonstrates a reality that so many Canadians are feeling and that so many Canadians are worried about. And that I think is creating more problems down the road, especially when we talk about birth rates and immigration and what the solution to these big economic questions are going to be down the line. Listen to this clip, and then I got to talk to you a little bit more about it.
The threats, the unjustified threats by President Trump, further strengthened the argument in favor of the Canada First agenda that I've been fighting for my whole life. And while we propose those solutions, we will not forget the single mom who can't afford food. We will not forget the seniors who are choosing between eating and heating. We will not forget that young 36-year-old couple whose biological clock is running out faster than they can afford to buy a home and have kids. We will not forget the families terrorized by crime and drugs. And so we will continue, despite calls to the contrary, to talk about those things, even if I am the only leader in the country that offers any change. And the choice, again, is whether...
And so that's pretty much it. That's the clip. And the controversial language, maybe you didn't hear anything controversial in there. Maybe you did, and you recognized immediately what everyone's outraged about. But it's this comment that he says to the 36-year-old couple who's fighting against their biological clock, feels like they can't have a home base before they, or for a couple that wants to have a home base, have real estate that they own before having children, which I think is what most people would ideally like, and it's not an economic reality for a lot of people, but there are people who are delaying having kids as a result. Now, the controversial nature of that statement is, okay, now we've got a lot of people are hearing this as, look at this white dude talking about women and their biological clocks, how gross, how inappropriate. And maybe the term biological clock wasn't the best picked. I mean, I think a lot of people will say, well, that's clearly referring to women. And I think it is more so than men. We look at it. But he does say, in terms of a couple trying to have kids and their biological clock as a couple is a reality. You can only have kids until you're so old. Like, that obviously is talking about the woman more so than the man, but it's a reality that men have declining sperm counts as well. And, but with that said, I can see how women could see that and feel like this is directly talking to them. But I think that this is getting too granular, too particular. Because I could see how both women and men could feel like this delaying of having kids is robbing something from them. Because if you can't have kids as early as you want, well, there are certain upsides and there are certain downsides to that. Maybe you wait until you feel a little more economically stable, which these days is maybe you are 35, 36 and into that older age to be having children, frankly. But maybe you feel more settled as a result. But having children later also comes with some downsides that I think are pretty obvious to most people. For one, maybe you won't have the same youthful energy that you would have otherwise had to play with your children, to be able to go play sports with them, or even if you're looking even further down the line, will that reduce the amount of time that you could have with your grandkids because you delayed having children? I think that there are certainly people who are waiting intentionally to have children. But we can't ignore the reality that there are people who, if they could, would want to have children at 24, 23, 25. That doesn't seem that like, what was the average age of a parent 50 years ago? I wonder if having children at 22, 23, 24 would be as possibly not frowned upon, but people are concerned about it these days because of the economic realities of, can you really support that child if you haven't grown your career up to that point? Everybody's racing against this kind of clock when it comes to these things with your children. I'm racing against an entirely different biological clock in the form of rapidly increasing male pattern baldness. This is the Matthews curse. Maybe not as serious of a biological clock issue, but the clock I was racing at, like I gotta find a girl before I lose even the front parts of my hair. Luckily, I have. Getting married in a year, been engaged for a year, long engagement. Take your time to plan. That's what we're doing. But I get it. Some people hear this statement from Poilievre and they equate it with some of the hyper extreme, hyper masculine messaging that's been going out to people. People call it the manosphere, right? There's different people, and you can debate about who would be included in that. But there are people online, influencers who have talked in ways that make it sound like the only value that a woman has is her ability to give birth and her looks. And I think that most everybody would agree that that is absolutely ridiculous and an awful way to think about people. I don't think that's the case. It's obviously not true that, yeah, I don't need to explain that to you. But some people are framing this whole thing as like Poilievre talking about women this way is proof that he wants to, by law and with the power of the state, support traditional gender roles and believes that it should be enforced by policy. I've heard people, I've listened to lots of commentary, like I tell everybody to listen to people that you agree with, listen to people that you disagree with so you can find out, why do I disagree with them? Or maybe I agree. But I've heard people saying that Poilievre just wants the husband going to work and the wife stays at home and takes care of the kids, and that's how things should be, and that's the way that has to be. Poilievre wants to go back to the 50s. He wants to take Canada backwards. This is the complaint that I've heard largely since this gaffe, would you call it? This language that people have found problem with, albeit not everybody thinks that this is an awful way to talk about people. But people say he wants to take us back 50 years like that's an entirely bad thing. There's good and there's bad with some of those ideas. And talking about the good things from the past doesn't mean that you can't recognize the bad things from the past and say, hey, what was good about back then? How can we apply some of those things to the ways that we're acting today while leaving some of the negative stuff in the past? Because there is certainly a lot of bad that was going on in decades past. The main one being, okay, if you've got one partner that's working and the other partner is helping to raise the children, or maybe that's what they're primarily doing, raising children, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing to do, and one that I think is should be applauded in every single case, no matter mother or father. A very serious job. But you have the downside of that job with a lack of economic agency, because if you're putting all of your time into raising children, well, then you certainly won't have the same amount of time to have to grow your career in the way that maybe you would have wanted to otherwise. Now that creates somewhat of an economic imbalance. And if maybe you're in an abusive relationship, but that abuser is the one that earns the money and you've got children to support, well, then maybe you're not going to leave this person that is abusing you because you're thinking of the best interests of your children. And what are we going to do? I don't have a career. I can't get another job here. If we were to leave, you get this kind of economic imprisonment. Certainly not a good thing, and a problem that anyone would have to face even today if they were on a single income family. That's not a problem that has disappeared in any way. And obviously everybody deserves equal rights to go and work and to do whatever they want to do with their lives. And I'm going to risk people saying, this isn't your place to talk about this sort of thing because you're a man. People might comment that, but I'll say that a woman's purpose shouldn't be limited to being a mother. It shouldn't be limited to, but I think that is a very, very powerful and very important role to take on for yourself if that's what you want to do. And saying that doesn't mean that there are people that just don't want to have kids, and that's fine. But I don't think that talking about this is a bad thing, because it's a reality that there are countless people who are having that route of motherhood or fatherhood taken away from them or dramatically delayed because of these economic issues, even if that was their priority and was their dream. The question shouldn't be, okay, well, how should we handle these gender dynamics, and who should be working and all of this, and how can we handle this difficult situation? That shouldn't be the question. We look back at the 50s and there's some of these good things. Whatever happened to a single income, being able to support a family comfortably, a single average income? Because that's what the world looked like not so long ago. And that's the truth. What has led us into this world where no longer can you have one person supporting a family so that you can have a person at home who is caring for children and growing these family bonds? Or even better, two part-time parents. Economically, you can't make that work. Two part-time working parents, right? Not I'm a parent half the time and then I'm at the bar the other half of the time. That's not what I'm talking about. Wouldn't it be nice if you could work 20 hours a week and so could your partner, and you could share these parenting duties and be able to actually spend time with your children, spend time with your family? Work to live instead of live to work, which it feels like these days. I don't think it's wrong to question how we got there. Even Poilievre making these comments, I don't hear him saying the types of things that I was saying earlier in this episode, because that's what we're getting down to. Like, part of the reason here is, well, housing is so incredibly expensive that you need two people to work. You need a multi-parent or a multi-person income to even survive. Even if you don't have kids, it feels like you need a double income, no kids, just to be able to keep your head above water in a lot of places in Canada, in a lot of situations for people in Canada. What got us here? the things I talked about here: real estate prices, the asset inflation, the devaluing of the dollars that we earn, to some extent, shipping off our manufacturing to Asian countries that can do it for far cheaper labor. Sure, we got cheaper goods, but was it worth it for what could have happened in terms of employment in the middle class? But I've been going through all the comments here and all of the people who are so upset by these statements that have been made. The biological clock statements. Maybe you could have used different words. I'll say that. I'll say it again. Maybe you could have used different words. But I'm reading comments and it's saying, well, this is exactly Poilievre's MO. His base is men under 35, and he's targeting them and their economic angst and uncertainty. So you got to take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, because I fall right into that category. But perhaps I can give you a little bit of insight into how I'm personally feeling in this situation, and you can put this together with how you're feeling. Maybe that's the same, maybe that's different, but at least we can have a little bit of a better understanding here. This is the way that I and many of my friends are feeling. Like, I look at my career and growing what I'm doing to earn money, not as this some sort of ladder that I'm trying to climb for the purpose of climbing it to prove to myself that I'm worthy or that I'm valuable or that I'm better than another person because I'm making more money. I'm some sort of high achiever. It's not an identity thing here. The sole purpose of me doing what I'm doing, whether it's talking here on YouTube like I've been doing lately, the software development I've done in the past, the real estate transactions that I've helped people out with in the past, all the things that I've done, the different jobs, this hasn't been to make money for money's sake or to climb some sort of ladder that will make me feel a certain way. This has all been to try to get towards this possibility of having a family, getting married, and having kids and being able to raise those kids happily and healthily without having to constantly stress and have panic attacks and not be able to fall asleep because you don't know how you're going to be able to put food on the table, let alone promise your children a better life, right? All of this work is not to climb some sort of ladder. It's to try to be able to support a family, and because that's what I personally think is most important. If I had the option to, I would gladly be the stay-at-home parent of a two-person partnership. That would be fine by me. I don't need to go to work and make money to try to prove my value to you. It's about the end goal, and if you can get the end goal of spending time with your family right now, then why not take it? That's the way that I look at things. So this idea that the conversation about motherhood and about fatherhood is taken, and these little soundbite clips are taken out and saying like, well, how dare you talk about a woman's body in any way? I think is outrage farming and minimizing of the real issue that people are facing, that they feel like, hey, we can't have kids when we want to because we want to make sure that this baby can eat for the next 10 years, and nobody is certain of that. Maybe that's why we have lower birth rates. Maybe that's why that has been going down and down. People say it's because you've gotten more educated, less agricultural as a society, so you're not having so many children to be able to help you on the farm and to do so, and to be a social safety net. Now we have the government to take care of us as a social safety net, so you don't have to have children to be able to be there for you when you reach your old age. This is still the retirement plan in many nations, less developed nations around the world. They'll have these places that have high birth rates, they'll have so many children because also they need to know that when their health deteriorates, well, there's going to be people there to help them. You can think of that what you will, but these are the places that have high birth rates. But the discussion shouldn't be about, well, that's awful that you're talking about this, having children and this being an important thing. It's not about careers or trying to have it all. I think it's about recognizing that there was a time when families could survive on a single income. It's not bad to talk about why that isn't the case anymore. That's my take on it. And it makes me look at things like the clip I'm about to show you. This is a clip of Mark Carney from the other day. It makes me think differently about this kind of clip because One of the headline policies of the Liberal government over the past couple of years has been $10 a day childcare. $10 a day childcare. There are some arguments to be made about, is this actually working out for the childcare providers? Are they able to offer as many slots as they would be able to in a different situation? I think that if it works, this $10 a day childcare, great policy to be able to have cheaper childcare for people so that they can, because the reality is both people need to work right now, but there is not the questioning of, how do we get back to a world where it isn't so income extreme, where you don't need two people making above an average living to be able to support a family? It's the constant addressing of the symptoms and not the disease that frustrates me. Listen to this clip. Let me show you. And it shows me this is not a policy, or the way that these people think about these policies is not, isn't this a wonderful thing that we're doing to make it easier and less expensive for people? This clip tells me, how can we as a country increase our GDP and our economic growth, even if that doesn't result in positive outcomes or positive increases in life fulfillment for our average person? If we can show that the economy is growing, then we'll be happy.
And this childcare program is good for the economy. For every dollar we spend on childcare, about $2.80 in economic value is created in return. In simple language, we are all better off if more parents can work if they wish to. That's the right.
But this is the problem, that it's not a question of if they wish to. It's not a question of if they wish to. If you're very, very lucky and you have one person who's making $200,000 and plus a year, then maybe you have that option to do that comfortably, or maybe you have additional support from family or some other way to make that work. The reality is, for most people, it's not a question of work if they choose to. It's a question of work or else I'm not going to have a place to live and my baby's not going to eat. That's a more accurate framing, I believe, of the situation that we find ourselves in. And the comments there about, for every dollar that we spend on childcare, we get $2.18 out in economic output. That's fantastic. The economy is growing because we're increasing workers in the economy. This highlights one of the biggest issues with Canada's economy, is that we have a terrible time trying to become more productive, where each one worker produces more and produces more valuable things so that they can get paid more on average. Now, in Canada, we haven't been focused on that. We've been focused on, how can we make our economy look like it's growing, or I guess honestly is growing, by increasing our GDP numbers, by increasing our economic activity. Sure, we could increase that by increasing the productivity of each individual worker. But the far easier method is just to increase the amount of workers in this system. Just increase the amount of people working, because if more people are working, and if there are more people and they're buying, then this will support the economy. Now, that economic growth, this line up into the right, looks good on the base level. But then you take a look at how are people feeling while that line is going up. This vibe session idea. How could people possibly feel bad? The GDP chart is going up. I think that for average people, you can understand why. That GDP chart is not a chart of life satisfaction. It's not a chart of how fulfilled are you. It's not a chart of what has your day-to-day life gotten easier or harder. No, that's not what that chart is. That chart is saying, on net for a whole country, how much have we produced? Pay no attention to the people inside the country that are resulting in that production and how they're feeling. That's not what it's about. It's about economic growth, perpetual growth. How can we get there? How can we get where we're going? as easily as possible. This seems to be what it's talking about. And don't get me wrong, I think, hey, if you've got to get childcare, having it for $10 a day, if that's something that you find is accessible to you and you actually have access to some of these slots that they're promising, wonderful. That's fantastic. I'm sure that'll make life a lot cheaper for you. Doesn't mean that you can't ask the question, how come we can't get back to the situation where we're productive enough that one person can support a family? That was a big rant for me to go on, and I kind of meandered there about a lot of different topics, but I hope that I'm getting across to you the way that I personally am feeling about it and the way that a lot of people that I'm talking to are feeling about it. I'm not saying I'm right in my views on all of these things, but I am saying that I'm being honest with you about the way that I'm feeling about them and the way that I'm thinking about them and what I believe to be true based on the information that I've consumed, because everyone's going to see things differently. If you're consuming different information, you're reading different news, you're getting news from different news sources, it's always going to be different. But all you can do is be honest. All you can do is do your best to parse through this stuff and figure it out. Listen to different creators. I say this every single time. Figure out what you like, what you don't like, why, but don't stop listening to the way that other people think about stuff. We've got to move on now, though, because there have been a number of different firings, people kicked out to the curb by their parties over the past few days. Now, it all started around a Liberal candidate, Mr. Chiang, and this controversy because, well, he said, well, I'm gonna show you the clip here. He said something that a lot of people were frustrated to hear, something that sounds a little bit criminal. The idea being this Liberal member of Parliament, while in power back in January, made a claim saying to media, saying, well, the Chinese government has a bounty out for a Conservative member of Parliament who will be competing with me. They've got a bounty out for him. And he says, while chuckling, does say it in a sort of joking way. He says, well, you can feel free to collect him and bring him here to the Chinese consulate and collect that bounty. Listen into the statement. Here it is.
Running, most probably is, the Chinese community knows, Zhou Zhang Jing, right? He is looking for the nomination. The Chinese media knows him. He was in the media business in Hong Kong, and here in Canada, he's a radio host, or I don't know if it was Singtel Media or Fairchild. He was a media person, so that's all he did all his life. But also right now, he is wanted by the Chinese government, and there's a $1 million reward on his head. So they want, if you guys want to pick him up and take him to the Chinese consulate, you make him $1 million. I'm just joking, but there is a arrest warrant out for him from the government of China, and there is a reward for him. But apart from that, I can't say more than that right now.
So there's the clip. And people got very, very up in arms about it. You can tell the tone that he's coming at this with is like, no, don't actually go do this thing. I'm joking. This is the way that he's talking about it. But calls for someone to be brought to a consulate, obviously, have to be taken seriously, especially when there have been times where, well, people have disappeared from Canada, and that's as far as I'll go. What I think is more questionable here is, what is he trying to say by this point that he's making? Is he trying to say, well, clearly the Chinese people in Canada shouldn't vote for this Conservative member of Parliament, or this Conservative candidate, rather. Clearly they shouldn't vote for him because there's a bounty out for him in China? That seems to be like the argument that he's actually making, which is problematic in and of itself. Saying we should be engaging voters in Canada, regardless of where they were born or where their family's from, I think should be considering, okay, what is best for Canada's interests when they're voting? To me, it seems like this MP is saying, well, keep this in mind, that this is a guy who has a bounty out for his arrest in China. Keep that in mind when you're considering who you should vote for here. Keep that in mind. So we've got this guy saying, well, you should bring him to the consulate, whether he's joking or not. And who really is above making these bounty threats on a politician? I mean, is that really all that bad? To bring someone to a consulate to never be heard of again, possibly, and then you deal with your political candidates like that. Is that really all that bad? I mean, come on. I mean, the Hogue Commission came through and said there was very little foreign interference in the past elections, very little meaningful foreign interference. So this must have been just some sort of fun little game of let's try to enforce a bounty set by a foreign state on Canadian soil. No harm, no foul. Well, and like the real story here, if you've been following it, this won't be a surprise to you, is that there is vast interference in Canada, despite what certain commissions have said. There's vast interference in Canada, and it's not any one individual nation, and it's not in any one individual party. In every leadership race, in every riding, there is interference, and it's coming from a bunch of different countries. The NSICOP report said that China, Iran, India, Russia, Khalistani separatists from India, all of these different countries, and I'm sure the list goes on, are trying to influence elections and trying to exert their soft power over every other nation. Don't think that this is just a Canada issue. All of these efforts are being duplicated all across the world in this desire to build power and to serve your nation's interests abroad. This isn't something that is shocking for a lot of people who have been following this story. And I know I was tongue-in-cheek about it before. I think that this is something that's problematic, even if he was saying it in a joking way. And it's something that the government sort of seems to take seriously depending on who it is. Like, imagine this was flipped around and the Indian government had a arrest warrant out for a leader of the Khalistani separatist movement that largely makes its base here in Canada. And a conservative MP said, well, you should take this leader to the India consulate and have them disappear. Like, obviously that's problematic. Not as problematic as having one of these leaders killed on Canadian soil, allegedly by the Indian government. But we heard all the noise about that when it came out a year ago, and then there was nothing. The Indian government denied it. Trudeau said we have proof, and then they just met and then stopped talking about it whatsoever. And there's this Hogue Commission and says there's no foreign interference and there's no meddling in Canada, and it's really nothing to be worried about. It's all fishy to me. It's all fishy to me. It wasn't just Mr. Chiang who was let go by the Liberals. Well, I mean, the outward facing thing was, I'm going to step down so I'm not a distraction. The same kind of thing that happened with Han Dong, saying, I don't want to be a distraction from the important work that the government is doing, so I'm going to step down. I'm going to take a back seat here for a while so I don't get in the way, so that I don't distract from the important work that we're doing as the government. But there were two conservative candidates who were also fired by the Central Conservative Party, saying, no longer will you be our candidate in the upcoming election. The first one was an MP, I believe, from Windsor, and he, on a podcast, honestly, in a similar joking tone to what Paul Chiang is saying. You can't really discern tone when you're reading from a piece of paper. But he says, we should bring back the electric chair, or somebody on the podcast says, we should bring back the electric chair for people like Epstein and Jeffrey Dahmer and Justin Trudeau. This is the comment that he made. And amidst the reaction to Paul Chiang in this controversy, where Mark Carney sort of stood behind him for a while after these comments came out, when this controversy came up about this conservative candidate, Poilievre said, you know what, nope, you're out of here. Would he have responded in that way to this candidate if he wasn't trying to show that he was handling his party in a better way than Carney? I'm not so certain. Now, the other one seems a little bit more problematic to me. The second conservative that was taken out of his seat, somebody in Quebec, Stéphane Marquis. This is the quote from the article. It says, recent social media posts by Stéphane Marquis promoted popular right-wing conspiracy theories, including that Bill Gates is trying to manipulate public health for profit through vaccines, and that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was provoked by the expansion of NATO. This is what he was talking about on his Twitter feed. And social media posts, they say. I don't know if it was just on X or whatever. Now, I'm not sure of the specifics of those theories, but it seems like having those opinions shouldn't warrant being kicked out of a party. I think that the diversity of opinions in a party is probably a pretty good thing to have. I think that the reason that this guy was kicked out was because these policies sound similar to what Trump is saying. And you can think whatever you want to think about whether that's true or whether that's warranted, what Trump is saying. But because it sounds like what Trump is saying, Poilievre, I think, is trying to distance himself from that, because the biggest attack on Poilievre right now from the Liberals is that this guy is just like Trump. And you got Canadians in this outrage, this fever pitch of losing their minds about what's going on in the States, losing their minds, glued to the news every single night, and making major decisions and thoughts about how we should handle our country going forward for the next 10 years based on what's happening just in this short period today. I think that is not entirely reasonable. But you've got a lot of people thinking like that, and extremely rustled up, extremely rustled up. Hey, that's the name of the show. That's the name of the show. Rustled up. No, that's pretty weak. That's pretty weak. But you've got all these people up in arms about this. So Poilievre trying to distance himself as much as possible from any thought of being like Trump. And this is some of the opinions that were shared on the American election trail. Now, I'm not sure of these specifics of the theories, but I don't think it's unfair to say that there are some troubling financial incentives in the pharmaceutical industry. We don't even have to talk about vaccines right now. We can talk about the opioid crisis and the way that, pharmaceutical companies manipulated public health agencies and doctors to try to push a certain drug that they were trying to sell en masse. And that pushing of these drugs, these opioids, resulted in serious negative outcomes for people, and also serious wealth gaining by these pharmaceutical industries. That's not something that's debated. That's not something that the conspiracy theory label is put on it, because there have been the investigations and we have found out. And now something that would have been controversial to say 15 years ago as it was happening, 10 years ago as it was happening, would be controversial to say. People would say, how dare you doubt our medical health professionals? Now is commonplace, and people are saying, yeah, that's awful. It's crazy what has happened with the opioid crisis. So now, to me, you can think what you want about the specific Bill Gates trying to manipulate public health for profit through vaccine. Think what you want about that, but it certainly isn't something that can be offhand dismissed when we look at the history of what has gone on. I think that the world moves because of money, and if you follow financial incentives, well, certainly some of those financial incentives are not going to be in the best interests of people, but in the best interests of building wealth amongst big corporations. So not really a fan of the firing of a conservative member of parliament because of statements like that. You can't offhand say that this isn't true. Same thing goes for the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, I'll be clear. I don't think that Russia had any right to invade Ukraine. I don't think that was a good decision, and this doesn't justify it in any way at all. But you remember how when the war started, every single time any politician was talking about it, they came out in lockstep saying the exact same verbiage. This is Russia's illegal, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Illegal and unprovoked. Illegal and unprovoked. Anytime this was mentioned, it was that language that was trying to be pushed time and time again. Like I said, doesn't excuse the invasion of the country. It's not an argument saying that this was a good thing or the right thing to do in this situation. But it makes you realize that today war is fought in an entirely different way. It's fought through yes, traditional means that that very sadly results in many, many deaths. I'm anti-war. I think that we should try to avoid these types of things as much as possible. I don't think it's ever truly warranted to send people into those types of situations. But war today is not only fought through physical kinetic means, it's also fought through public perception. Can you get a population to believe that what you're doing is justified, or what you're not doing is justified, or what another country is doing is unjustified? Can you craft that narrative that will tell people how they're supposed to think about a conflict? Like, you come out at the start of this Russia-Ukraine war, and you're using that phrase unprovoked every single time. But the public hasn't had the chance to form their opinions about what's going on there. But every time you're saying unprovoked, illegal, unprovoked, illegal, it's almost like you know that provocation is going to be the reason that Russia says they're doing what they're doing. Now, you can debate all day long about whether that is true or whether that's not. But there's so much propaganda on both sides that it's incredibly hard to know what's true. And I guess for this conservative candidate saying, well, okay, can we look at this? What is the possibility that, can we talk about the reasons that Russia's saying that they're in this war? That seems like something that would be reasonable to talk about if we want this war to end. But that would be pushing against the narrative that, while I do believe that it was unjustified, you got to look at why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they saying they're doing what they're doing? And how can we use that information to sort of inform ourselves about, well, what's the best way to get out of this? How can we stop people from dying? How can we stop this seemingly endless conflict from going on, where it seems like nobody's really going to win here? How do we get out of that? I don't think you can get out of it or be reasonably talk about it if you're not thinking about, okay, what does each individual party think the truth is? And then how do we somehow take that into consideration as you negotiate or trying to figure something else out? But also what this says is that if people are getting fired for what that guy just, I'm not getting into politics. Not that that's something I ever want to do. I've had people say, oh, you should get into that. You should get into that. I don't think I want to. I don't think I want that level of scrutiny. It's far easier to sit in my extra bedroom and talk into a camera than have to walk around. And that's why I'm doing all this stuff also, is to have this kind of life flexibility to it. Like, I don't have children yet, but that's clearly something I really want in my future. And to give up that time and that time freedom that you can have by working another job, instead, like going into politics instead of doing something else that has more flexibility, I don't think that's a sacrifice I'd be willing to make. So I guess that's the end of politics for me. If I can't be accepted into even the Conservative Party, I guess there's other parties as well that you could look into, but not something that I really see in my future. One more cancellation, one more firing, I guess you could say, that happened. And bear with me here. I'm gonna rip on my prescription sunglasses for those of you watching. Got it, Corey Hart style sunglasses at night inside, just so I can read this screen. CTV has canceled a fact-checking segment in response to political pressure from Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives. The audio recording shows CTV canceled an election misinformation segment with journalist Rachel Gilmore after online backlash from Conservatives. We talked about Rachel in the last episode, looking at some of her points. And I don't want to get into an I told you so situation, but that's kind of what we're in. What happened here is that this specifically labeled misinformation segment on CTV, it was announced, and you have a person here who does have seemingly left-leaning opinions, and goes through facts, in my eyes, with a little bit of that bias and that narrative construction behind it, like anyone does, like I do, like every single person do. I think you can't really avoid it. But because she was left-leaning, as soon as this panel, or maybe not because she was left-leaning, but when this segment was announced, you all of a sudden have a wave of trolls, a wave of people online saying absolutely heinous things and campaigning CTV to get this taken off. And that's what they ended up doing. She lost this segment on CTV's morning show. But I said it last week on this show that you're listening to right now. This whole fact-checking thing is over. That's done. I don't think that there's the appetite for having a news organization, specifically one that's on TV or is supported by any big money. I think the world where people are using them as the arbiters of truth, the people who decide what is true and what is not, I think that time is pretty much over. And it's not about one political side's views or another political side's views. It's about this reality that in the internet age, facts can be assembled in different ways to support whichever narrative truth you want to put out there. Like, even if you're doing your best to try to keep bias out, of course it's going to be there. And I was on Twitter when this was announced, and people have said some heinous shit about this woman, especially because she's a woman, and comments that would only be levied on a woman. I think all of that's awful. And people are always going to hate online, but it did get pretty extreme. But I think that the blame is not on her specifically. I think that the blame largely is on CTV for labeling this segment as covering all of the misinformation in the election campaign. I think that if they said, hey, this is one person's take on things that they believe were true and that they then proved were not true through their methods of proof, that doesn't really have a ring to it. Maybe we get a producer on that. Get a producer on that to come up with a better name for that. But I think labeling this as, this is the segment where we're going to tell you what is true and what is not. We've got this crack journalist on it to tell you what is misinformation and what is not misinformation. I think that is just not something that can work anymore. It's just not something that can work anymore. This whole idea of misinformation. I want to show you the tweet that sort of set off a lot of the windstorm that then came out after this. This tweet, I believe from I think that this guy is related to Polyv in terms of campaign. So this is frustrating to see, as it would be from anyone. He says, in a shocking new low for CTV News, they are having this disgraced disinformation peddler lie directly to their viewers under the guise of news. So, I think that this is a little bit short-sighted as well. Just this using it, saying that's disinformation, that's misinformation. You're the one that's lying. I'm not lying. You're lying. It all seems so immature from every single side, trying to and so full of themselves on each side that you could think that you have the objective truth of reality and your interpretation of things and your innate ability to get to the root of what is true and what is not is better than everybody else's. And now you are the one that gets to say you are a disinformation peddler. If you're in the case of this conservative calling out Gilmore, or Gilmore herself saying, I'm on this misinformation panel on CTV. There's a lot of ego, I think, that comes with saying, I know what is true. I know what isn't true. This is why I say on the program that every single time I'm talking to you on here, this is what I believe to be true based on the information that I've consumed. You may have consumed different information. You may have interpreted that information differently than I have. You might be right. I might be right. We're trying to parse through all of this together. We're trying to get to the root of what is true. But I don't think any individual can claim what is true and what is not. And this is a conversation that I had with some of my friends recently, how incredibly frustrating it is to be in this media landscape, in this world where, okay, you look at a news article, but then you read it and you think, oh, that sounds right. But then you think, okay, well, what are the interests here? Oh, well, is this news company owned by an American hedge fund? Is it publicly funded by the Canadian government? Who is behind this financially, and how are they writing their stories in different ways that to try to make you think a different way about something? Okay, so that's a news article. Maybe you go and say, okay, well, what studies were they sourcing? What think tank were they quoting in this article? And then you go to that think tank, who you read that and you think, okay, well, that reporter misrepresented what was written here in this think tank. But even what was written here at this think tank, who was funding that and what were the incentives there? You go even further, you go to studies who funded it. Maybe I sound like an overly skeptical person here, but I have a very hard time, and maybe this is will be something that people will clip out and use to discredit me in the future. I have an incredibly hard time being certain that what I believe is true, certainly. I can have a pretty good idea and pretty strong beliefs, but to tell somebody I am right in the way that I'm thinking about it and you are wrong, I think is an incredibly ego-heavy thing to do, and one that I think is impossible in today's world. So if you carry anything forward from this episode, I think you got to carry that, because I could be wrong on every single thing in my viewpoint. Every single thing I say could be backwards. It's hard to tell for sure. I don't think that it is. I'll be honest with you. I'm not saying anything that I don't believe. I'm not saying anything that I haven't thought about. But as new information comes out, if there's new information for me to look at that I haven't considered, well, then all these opinions could change based on that information. And I think that's the way that people should be. You need to focus on what you think needs focusing on. And for me, I really just think that we should get all this foreign interference out in the public. And for that reason, I applaud what has gone on in foreign interference lately. I applaud these public bounties on opponent politicians, all of these outright clear interference stories that are coming out, because at least it's out in the open. At least it's out in the open, because it's been happening, and it's happening more and more and more. So why don't we just make it the Wild West? Let's make a public bounty board for different politicians, and everyone can just put up their different rewards. Let's just let's take it away from the dark web, put it right up there, and then people can know what they're voting for. Hey, am I voting for this policy supporting China? Am I voting for this policy supporting India or Russia or Iran? Make it clear, at least. Bounties for everybody, I think, is the takeaway here. I've gotten some comments, people saying they can't tell when I'm being tongue-in-cheek. Here's the indicator. Obviously not a great thing. A little bit dry sometimes. I think that you can clock that, though. But with all that said, I think that covers it for today. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, this new channel, The Russ Matthews Show. If you're not already subscribed there, make sure you do so. Rate and review the podcast on all of your favorite podcast platforms. That's Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon podcasts as well. You can check out The Russ Matthews Show there. Let me know what you think. Like I said, I'm trying to figure out this stuff just like anyone else is. Leave me a comment. But with all that said, thanks so much, everybody. I'll catch you next time. Goodbye.